The woman who walked through that church door was not supposed to be there. No one had invited her. No one had even thought to call her. But there she was, standing at the entrance in a white linen dress with gold trim, bodyguards flanking her on both sides, and a stillness about her that made the entire room go quiet. And the woman who had spent the last 3 weeks trying to destroy the bride? She went pale. But we will get to that. Yewande Asante had a way of carrying herself that people mistook for arrogance. She walked like she knew where she was going, even when she didn't. She spoke quietly, so you had to lean in to catch what she said. She did not beg. She did not explain herself more than once. These were things she had learned not from wealth or privilege, but from a childhood where no one had time to hear you twice. She had grown up in a small house on the outskirts of Accra, the kind of house where the roof argued with the rain every season, and the kitchen was also the dining room and the living room, depending on where you moved the chairs. Her mother, Mame Essie. No, wait, her mother's name was Ahufe Asante, a woman who pressed her church blouse with a pot of hot water because they had no iron, who braided Yewande's hair every Saturday morning and called it their quiet time together. Yewande's father had died when she was 9. He left behind a bicycle, a Bible with underlined passages, and a debt that Ahaufe spent 4 years quietly settling so no one would have reason to speak poorly of his name. So Yewande learned very young that dignity was not something you inherited. It was something you maintained, one careful day at a time. She had come to Canada at 23 on a study permit, alone, with one large suitcase and a phone number for a distant cousin who turned out to be not so welcoming once she actually arrived. She worked nights at a long-term care facility in Brampton while studying accounting during the day. She ate the same 3 meals rotating for a year and a half. She did not complain about this. She did not post about it. She simply kept going. By the time she was 31, she had her designation, a small apartment she had furnished slowly over 2 years, and a job she was proud of. She was not rich, but she was, as Ahaufe used to say, standing on her own ground. She had met Tobias at a mutual friend's gathering. Not a party exactly, more like one of those events where someone brings jollof rice and it becomes a whole evening. Tobias Osei Boteng, tall, thoughtful, a civil engineer who made terrible jokes and laughed loudest at them himself. He had asked for her number at the end of the night by handing her a sticky note that said, "In case you want to talk to someone who knows 3 Twi proverbs and means them." She had folded it and put it in her pocket without a word. She called him 3 days later. They dated for 2 years. He was patient in a way she hadn't expected from a man. He showed up. He remembered things. When she mentioned once, in passing, that she had never eaten at a proper restaurant for her birthday, always a home-cooked dinner because restaurants were a luxury, he filed that away without comment, and then, 6 months later, took her somewhere with cloth napkins and a candle on the table and said nothing about it being special, just acted as though this was simply what they did now. She loved him for that, not the restaurant, the remembering. His family was a different matter. The Osei Botengs were not originally from Ghana. They were Ghanaian by heritage, Canadian by decades of residency, and Torontonian by attitude, which is to say they had a particular way of measuring people that they mistook for discernment. His mother, Vivienne Osei Boteng, had been in Canada since she was 25. She had built something real here, a property management company, a reputation in the community, a membership at a church in North York that held a certain social standing. She wore blazers to Sunday service. She had opinions about which caterers you used for events and which ones said something about you. Yewande was not what Vivienne had imagined for her son. This was made clear not with words, at least not at first, but with the particular brand of politeness that is its own form of hostility. The smile held a half-second too long. The question asked just slightly too carefully. The comment about Yewande's neighborhood delivered as concern. "Oh, Brampton? That must be quite the commute. Have you thought about moving?" "It's so important to be settled." Yewande smiled back. She was good at smiling back. Tobias saw some of it, not all of it. Men rarely see all of it. The first time Yewande had dinner at the Osei-Boating home in Etobicoke, Vivienne set the table with the good china, but seated Yewande at the end furthest from the kitchen conversation. Tobias's sister, Brenda. No, not Brenda. His sister's name was Celestine. Celestine Osei-Boating 26, who worked in marketing and had a way of laughing at things that made you wonder if the laugh was at you. Celestine had asked Yewande, very sweetly, how long she had been in Canada. 8 years, Yewande said. "And your family is still in Ghana?" "My mother, yes." "Oh." A little pause. "That must be hard. Does she ever visit?" "Not yet." Another pause. "Well, hopefully soon." Yewande ate her food. It was good food, she gave Vivienne that. The Contomeyer stew was excellent. What she did not eat was the subtext being served alongside it. Tobias proposed in February, in their apartment, on a Tuesday evening with no fanfare. Just the two of them and takeout going cold on the counter, because he had gotten nervous and then suddenly done it before he lost the nerve again. The ring was simple, white gold. She had not told him her preference, but he had noticed, months before, that she never wore yellow gold. She said yes before he finished asking. The trouble started before the engagement announcement had even been posted. Vivienne called Tobias the next morning. Yewande did not hear the call, but she felt its temperature when Tobias came out of the bedroom quieter than he had gone in. He did not tell her what was said. He said his mother needed time. He said she would come around. He said these things with the careful voice of a man trying to protect two people at once and failing to protect either. Yewande said, "Okay." She meant it. She was willing to give time. What she was not prepared for was what time was being used for. 3 weeks before the wedding, a woman came to see her. Yewande was at work, a lunch break, sitting in the small staff room at her firm with her Tupperware and a podcast she had been meaning to finish for 2 weeks. When she received a text from an unknown number asking if she had a few minutes. Something about it being important and preferring to speak in person. She almost ignored it. She should have. But she texted back asking who it was. "A friend of the family," the reply said. "I promise I mean no harm. Can we meet?" They met at a coffee shop on King Street that afternoon. The woman was already seated when Yewande arrived. Mid-50s, well-dressed in the deliberate white way that announces money, with rings on 2 fingers and reading glasses pushed up on her head, like she had just paused something important to be here. She introduced herself as Audrey. Audrey Mensah Osei, a cousin of Vivienne's from London, in Toronto for the week. Yewande sat down and ordered nothing. "I'll be direct," Audrey said, which was the thing people said right before they were not direct. "The family is concerned." "About the match." "The match," Yewande repeated. "Tobias is. He has a future, a specific kind of future. And there are concerns that, how do I put this, that the situation isn't entirely balanced. The situation," Yewande said again. Audrey had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "There's a girl, a woman, Adao Machukwu, lovely woman, Nigerian-Canadian. Her family is in finance. They've known each other since university. Nothing happened between them, but the family always thought. Anyway, that's beside the point." She cleared her throat. "The point is that a contribution has been arranged. By the family. For you. To help you, as they see it, move on with more stability." Yewande looked at her for a long moment. "How much?" she said quietly. Audrey named a number. It was not a small number. Yewande picked up her bag from the back of the chair. She stood. She buttoned her coat one button at a time. "Tell Vivienne," she said, still quietly, still evenly, "that my price is not available. Not because I don't have one, but because this isn't about money." She walked out. She did not cry until she was in the elevator of her building 45 minutes later. And even then it was only for about 90 seconds, because she did not have the time or patience to give this more than 90 seconds. Then she washed her face, changed out of her work clothes, and called Tobias. She told him everything. There was a long silence on his end. "She wouldn't," he said. "She did." Another silence. Longer. "I'll call her," he said. "Tobias, Yewande, I will handle this." She didn't argue, but she also didn't believe it. What happened next was not a resolution. It was a performance of one. Vivienne apologized to Tobias. She said Audrey had acted on her own. She said put. She had never asked anyone to do anything of the sort. She said this was all a misunderstanding, and that of course she was happy for her son, and of course she would support his decision. She said all of this with great conviction. And Tobias, who wanted very badly to believe her, believed her. Yewande said nothing. She watched. She remembered that dignity was something you maintained, one careful day at a time. The wedding was small, 38 people at a venue in Mississauga, a Saturday in May. She had done most of the planning herself. The flowers were from a woman in Scarborough who also grew up in Accra and gave her a discount she hadn't asked for. The caterer was a man named Foster Adjei, who had been catering Ghanaian events in the GTA for 15 years, and whose jollof rice was the kind that made people stop talking. Everything was arranged. Yewande had one person she had wanted to invite who had not responded. Her name was Solange. Solange Beaulieu Diallo had been Yewande's closest friend for 6 years. They had met at the long-term care facility in Brampton on Yewande's second week there. Solange was already 2 years in, Haitian-Canadian, sharp as anything, funny in a way that crept up on you slowly, like a slow-moving joke you didn't get until you were already laughing. She had helped Yewande understand the shift schedule, the unwritten rules of the break room, which supervisors to avoid on Mondays, and which one would cover for you if you needed 5 extra minutes. They had been inseparable for years. Coffee before early shifts. Long phone calls on weekends. The kind of friendship where you don't need to explain context because the other person was there for all the context. Then Solange's mother had become very ill. Cancer, the kind that moved fast, and Solange had gone back to Montreal, and then had stayed. Not because she wanted to, but because the leaving was complicated, and then her mother passed, and the grief was complicated, and then a year had gone by, and the calls had gotten shorter, and then less frequent, and then one day Yewande realized she had not actually spoken to Solange in 8 months. She had sent the wedding invitation by post. Old-fashioned, yes, but she knew Solange appreciated that. She had included a handwritten note on the card. Nothing came back. She told herself Solange might come anyway. She also told herself to stop hoping for things people hadn't promised. The morning of the wedding, she dressed in her bridal suite, a small room at the venue that smelled like cedar and had a window facing the parking lot, which was not romantic but was real, and Yewande had always preferred real. Ahofe was on a video call from Accra, watching through the screen, making sounds of pride and grief simultaneously, the way mothers do when they are watching something they cannot quite believe they lived to see. "You look like your grandmother," Ahofe said. "The one who never bent for anyone. Is that a compliment, Mama? It is the highest one I know." Now, before we continue, if you haven't yet subscribed to Ancient African Folktales, take a moment right now. Stories like this one. Stories about women who do not bend, about loyalty that doesn't expire, about what happens when underestimated people finally step into their full power. These are the stories this channel was built to tell. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Because what happens next? You do not want to find out from someone else. The ceremony was supposed to begin at 2 o'clock. At 1:45, Vivienne arrived. This was not unusual. What was unusual was who she brought with her, and what she did immediately after taking her seat. She had brought 3 women from the church. Pillars, Tobias would have called them. Women whose presence lent a certain social weight to any gathering, and within minutes of sitting down, Vivienne had found a moment to speak quietly to the officiant, a man named Reverend Gima, who had known the Osei Boateng family for years. Yewande, still in the bridal suite, did not know about this conversation. What she did know, 40 minutes later, was that Reverend Gima had come to the door looking uncomfortable and said that there was a concern that had been raised, a procedural question, something about documentation, and perhaps they should delay the start by 30 minutes. What documentation? Yewande said. She was very still. Reverend Gima could not quite meet her eyes. A question about the civil component. Whether the proper, it was brought to my attention by a family member that... Which family member? He did not answer. Yewande looked at him. She looked at the woman who was doing her hair, who had frozen mid-pin. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. She thought about 90 seconds. She thought about the envelope in Audrey's hand. She thought about what her mother's grandmother, the one she had never met but heard stories about, had done when the men came to take her land in 1961. She had walked out to meet them, wearing her best dress. Yewande stood up. "Tell everyone I'll be out in 2 minutes," she said. She walked to the ceremony room herself, not through a back corridor, through the main hall, past the guests already seated, in her dress, with her hair half pinned and a look on her face that made people straighten involuntarily. She found Tobias speaking in low, urgent tones with Reverend Gima and 2 of Vivienne's churchwomen near the front. "Is there a problem?" she said. Not a question. Tobias turned. His expression shifted, relief and distress in equal measure. "Yewande, is there a problem with my wedding?" she said again. Vivienne, seated now in the front row, spoke from her chair. "Yewande, this is not the place for a scene." "Agreed," Yewande said. "So I suggest we proceed. There are questions that need to be." "There are no questions," Yewande said. Her voice was entirely level. "I have documents. I have a license. I have a caterer and 38 guests, and a dress I paid for myself, and I have a man over there who asked me to marry him. If there is a procedural concern, it can be resolved in a courthouse on Monday. Today, we proceed." The room was extremely quiet. Tobias looked at his mother. Then he looked at Yewande. Then he straightened his jacket and walked to the altar. Reverend Gima, to his credit, followed. Vivienne did not move. Her face was composed in that particular way of people who have decided to file the loss for later. And that was when the doors at the back of the venue opened. No one heard a car pull up. No one had noticed the vehicles in the parking lot. 3 dark SUVs, government plates, that had arrived while everyone was seated. The venue coordinator would later say she had tried to tell someone, but things had moved quickly. What the guests saw was a woman walk through the doors. She was 33 years old. She wore a silk dress the color of deep green, no jewelry except small gold earrings and heels that made no sound on the hardwood floor. She walked the way Yewande walked, like she knew where she was going even when she didn't. 2 men in dark suits stopped at the entrance and waited there. They did not need to come further. The woman walked the length of the aisle, unhurried, and stopped about 4 feet from the front row. She looked at Vivienne. Vivienne looked at her. Something passed between them. Not words, not yet, just a recognition, a recalibration. The woman turned to Yewande and smiled. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. "I had a flight this morning." Her name was Solange Beaulieu Diallo. She had been, for the last 14 months, the Deputy Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. Appointed after 20 years in federal public service, a career Yewande had known about in broad strokes, but not in the detail it had apparently reached. The letter of congratulations she had sent when she first heard the news had gone to an old email address. Solange had never received it. The wedding invitation, the handwritten card, the one sent by post, had arrived at Solange's mother's old address in Montreal, which had been forwarded 3 times before it found her. She had received it 4 days ago. She had been in Ghana on official business when she read it. She had taken the first available flight back. Now, Yewande did not know any of this standing at the altar. All she knew was that Solange was here. Her friend, who she had been afraid to hope for, was standing in her ceremony, with that same look on her face from years ago, the one from the break room at the care facility, the one that said, "I see exactly what's happening here, and I'm not going anywhere." Yewande put a hand to her mouth. She did not cry. She was saving that, but her eyes did that thing they do when the feeling is bigger than the space available. Solange reached out and took her hand briefly. Squeezed, let go. Then she turned and looked at the room. Not at Vivienne specifically. Not pointedly, just at the room, calmly. The way someone looks at a room when they are comfortable in it. "Please," she said pleasantly to Reverend Guima, "continue." And Reverend Guima, who had been aware for the last 60 seconds that the woman who had just walked in arrived in government-plated vehicles with security detail, and who was a man with enough years of experience to understand when the social gravity in a room had shifted completely and irreversibly. He cleared his throat, opened his book, and continued. The ceremony was 22 minutes. Tobias cried at his vows, quietly, like he was hoping nobody would notice. Everybody noticed. Nobody said anything about it, because there is a specific tenderness reserved for watching a man who is not afraid to mean what he says. Yewande did not cry. She held Tobias's hands and looked at him and thought about Tuesday evenings and sticky notes and cloth napkins and the long, unbothered road it had taken to get here. Vivienne sat in the front row and did not move and did not speak and did not cause any further procedural concerns. After the pronouncement, when the room broke into sound and people rose and the caterer's assistants appeared from the side room with trays, Yewande made her way to Solange. They stood to one side of the room, slightly apart from the noise. "You came from Ghana," Yewande said. "I had meetings in Accra, Wednesday and Thursday." Solange shrugged lightly. "The flight wasn't terrible." "You didn't have to." Solange looked at her. "Do you remember? 2018, February? My car broke down at 4 in the morning on the 427. Who drove out from Brampton to sit with me in the cold until the tow came? Who went back to work afterward and didn't say one word about it?" Yewande was quiet. "You told me once," Solange said, "that you would rather lose a day than have your friend standing in the cold alone." She adjusted one of the gold earrings. "Well, I would rather fly overnight than have my friend standing at the altar without someone in her corner." Yewande looked at her for a long time. "Your earrings are beautiful," she said finally. Solange laughed, that laugh that crept up on you, slow and then all at once. "I know," she said. "I got them in Accra, actually. There's a woman at the Makola market. Remind me to give you her name." Vivienne found Yewande near the end of the reception. Yewande was standing by the window with a plate of Foster's jollof rice, because the jollof rice was mandatory, and she saw Vivienne approach and thought about 90 seconds, and thought about the bicycle and the Bible and the debt paid quietly over 4 years. Vivienne stopped beside her. She did not look at her directly. "The food is good," Vivienne said. "It is," Yewande agreed. A silence, the kind that has weight. "The woman," Vivienne said carefully. "Your friend. She is." I wasn't aware she was in that position. Yewande looked out the window at the parking lot where one of the dark SUVs still sat. She didn't come because of her position, she said. She came because we're friends. Vivienne absorbed this. My son, she said after a moment, chose well. He did, Yewande said simply. She did not add, despite your best efforts. She did not need to. She took a bite of her jollof rice. Vivienne stood for another moment, then moved away toward where Tobias was laughing with someone across the room. Later, much later, when the guests had gone and the caterer was packing up and Tobias had gone to settle the final invoice, Yewande and Solange sat outside on the venue's small patio in the May evening, heels off, the sounds of Mississauga around them. Distant highway, a bird somewhere, the low hum of a city that does not stop. You should have told me, Solange said, about what they tried to do. You were dealing with your mother. I was dealing with grief. That doesn't mean you weren't allowed to still exist. She looked at Yewande sideways. That's a bad habit of yours, going quiet when things get hard. Yewande thought about this. Probably, she said. Probably, Solange repeated, like the understatement it was. They sat there for a while without speaking, the way you can only do with someone you have known long enough that the silence is comfortable, that it doesn't need to be filled, that it is its own kind of conversation. Part 2, Solange said suddenly. Sorry, this story. There needs to be a part 2, because I have a feeling Vivienne Oseboteng is not finished. She paused. I'm just saying, I'm available. Yewande laughed. It was a full laugh, the kind that surprised her. You live in Ottawa. I work in Ottawa. I live in Plains. Solange waved a hand. Details. Yewande looked up at the sky, that particular thin blue of a Canadian May evening before the last light leaves. She thought about her mother, probably asleep by now in Accra, in the house where the roof used to argue with the rain. She thought about the woman who pressed her blouse with hot water and called Saturday mornings their quiet time. She thought about what it meant to still be standing. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming. Solange was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You would have been fine without me, you know. I know, but you didn't have to be. Yewande looked at her and smiled. That's the thing about real friendship. The kind that is rooted in something true. It doesn't ask you to be fine on your own. It doesn't disappear when the years get complicated and the calls get shorter and the geography changes. It boards an overnight flight. It walks through a door when you didn't know you needed it to, and it says, without needing to say it at all, I showed up because you showed up for me, and I always will. Before you go, drop your answer in the comments below. If your closest friend from years ago called you right now and said they needed you at their wedding in 3 days, would you go? A. Yes, real friendship has no expiry date. B. It depends on how long we've been out of touch. Tell me which one, and tell me why. Because this one, like Yewande and Solange's story, might just make you think about someone you've been meaning to call. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, welcome to Ancient African Folktales. Subscribe and stay a while. There are more stories where this one came from, and not a single one of them will waste your time.